Hey everyone, BioFan here. Today I'm joined by JV from JV2017gameplay, and we're going to talk about 10 things we want to see from the future of the Mass Effect franchise. Thanks for joining me, JV.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So it may be a little critical up in here for the next few minutes, but we're going to talk about kind of what we want to see as the Mass Effect franchise hopefully moves forward into future content.
So the first thing for me is that they return to the Milky Way. And I know this is like a really hard line opinion here, but I just feel there are so many stories left to tell in the Milky Way. Some people don't think that's the case, but there is some seriously rich lore going on with Mass Effect. And I think, going pre-Shepard would be perfect to avoid a lot of the conflicts with canon and which ending did you choose and all of that stuff. So personally, I would love to see a prequel about the first Contact War, something about the Elusive Man, Captain Anderson. There are a lot of interesting characters they could go in and flesh out the backstory for. And I would be it would be disappointing for fans of Andromeda if you really liked, Andromeda, and there are plenty of you guys out there. But I think we have to be realistic and think about the fact that they're considering doing something like this. Right now, I'd much rather go back and replay the original trilogy than Mass Effect Andromeda because that's the universe I fell in love with. That's the one I grew up with throughout the original trilogy.
I think that if the story's done well, they kind of have more freedom within the Andromeda galaxy, but I'm good with either way, so long as it's a good story. I think that what they run into with going back to the Milky Way is that it's more limited and that you have to tell a different type of story, which can still be amazing and just as good, but you can't have like the fate of the entire galaxy at stake because we already did that. So I think
Right.
that going into that, it'd have to be something, just a different kind of story, kind of looking at how Dragon Age 2, even though it only had 6 months of development time, it was still a good game. It was a different kind of story for them. Like they told a different kind of narrative, but it was still good, in my opinion. There was maybe they need a little more of it, but it was still really good. So I know that they were kind of thinking of doing the first Contact War back when they were like pitching around ideas for the next Mass Effect game. So
Right.
they may already kind of have like the foundation for that. So I would be open to it. The thing where it gets a little complicated there is you kind of have where there's not as many aliens, and I think people really would want to go back to like the Citadel and things like that. So I think that that would maybe be a little bit harder to do. So I
Right.
think that while it could be good, it wouldn't be as nostalgic, if that makes sense.
Right. That's an absolutely fair point. It would be another different kind of Mass Effect game.
Yeah. One thing that I want to see moving forward is kind of when you do talk with your crew or your squad mates, those conversations need to be a lot less casual than they were in Andromeda. Like the kind of conversations we had with our crew were pretty like, where'd you grow up? What'd you do? Blah blah blah. Just kind of like general learning about each other. It weren't these like moments where they got to really express who they are as characters. Versus if you look at the original trilogy, every time you go and talk with them, there may be like a casual approach to the conversation, but what actually happens in that moment kind of really helps to express that character and who they are in their identity. But with Andromeda, it was just kind of like casual, like what you would actually have in like real life kind of conversations. It's not like Jack being all moody and rah, or like Tally being like the most adorable thing ever, or Miranda being Miranda. It's kind of like, just what's your favorite kind of cereal? Oh, you like Blastos? Cool. Um, I feel that while the conversations were a little too casual in Andromeda, though, there were those moments like their personal missions where they really, really got to show off the character and who they were as like people.
Right.
Um, and the voice actors had really good skills, but they didn't really get to strut their stuff, if that makes sense, until those like personal missions with those highly intense emotional moments. I'm not saying that like every time you go and talk to a squad mate, they need to have like a cathartic experience where they realize something deep about their soul, but just like something other than, the basics, if
Right.
that makes
What
sense.
the weather was, like an
Yeah.
elevator conversation, like small talk,
Yeah.
basically.
Less small talk. A little is okay, but like it was pretty heavy on the small talk.
Yeah, and you're right about those like they were very limited, those emotional moments. I remember one that caught me particularly was Drac. when he talked about his body wearing down and what he's had to go through. And
that was a good one, I will say.
God, that almost brought me to tears on stream because I was playing it for the first time. That was a fantastic moment, but I hope we have more of those, absolutely. So next up, this is going to be a lot of return to this, return to that, so I apologize, but I want them to return to the Paragon Renegade system. And BioWare's official stance, I think Mac Walters talked about this a lot leading up to the release of Andromeda, is that Paragon and Renegade was unique to Shepard. It was a Shepard mechanic, and I think it really was. That made a lot of sense to me in terms of moving on to something else with, the Writer twins. And so, that was an interesting choice, and I thought that was a valid reasoning for it, but removing it kind of altered the tone of Mass Effect for me in terms of the dialogue, and not in a way that I would like to see. I was open to it, and I was like, yeah, bring it on, let's see how it works, but in the end, I really do miss Paragon and Renegade. It added a layer of consequence to your actions, whether they impacted the world at large or not. You always felt the, weight of your decisions, and so I love morality in games in general. Fallout is another great example for those of you that watch my channel. Fallout, I really miss the karma system in the newest Fallout, and so I don't like how they're going away from morality, it seems like, in more recent titles for these games. So making tough decisions gives narrative weight to them, and I want to see that in the future Mass Effect.
I totally agree. I think that, I was curious because I know that they wanted to kind of make a more, less black and white kind of thing by taking away Paragon Renegade. But at the same time, how it ended up being was, I didn't really know what was going to happen when I did those interrupts. Right. I never really, I was it kind of feels like, oh, do the interrupt, because it's an interrupt. Right. It never felt like there was an either or, versus with Paragon Renegade, it was oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a bad guy. Or, I do want to do that. I want to be an asshole. I want to just, make everyone hate me. But I feel like they could do a new system that includes that morality, but isn't quite as Shepard specific. Sure. So having different kind of interrupts would be good, but those interrupts were good at shaping who our character was in morality, versus the interrupts in Andromeda were just kind of there, if that makes sense. I didn't feel like it was an either or situation in some cases. It was just kind of you have the opportunity to do an interrupt instead of a dialogue option, if that makes sense, Yeah,
and it takes away the planning element, too, to your character. And while people
totally
said that was, this new Andromeda system was going to be more natural, was the term. It was going to be more natural, because it's not natural to plan out how you're going to, do, but that's not, it didn't feel that way to me. And so I felt that it was way more natural to be okay, if there is an opportunity to do some kind of Paragon interrupt or whatever, what do they call it? I can't remember. Narrative action?
Yeah.
Something like
that. Narrative interrupt, yeah.
Narrative interrupt, then I would plan to do that, because that's how I want my Shepard to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of felt the same way, with doing characters that weren't, the self-insert, when doing, additional playthroughs, I was okay, this person's going to value this and that, but then there wasn't a lot of opportunity to make choices for that, if that makes sense. It was a little too bland, a little too gray. Didn't give you the opportunity to go to either side.
Yeah, you couldn't be evil.
Yeah, I always need one evil playthrough in any game. Yeah, any game. I miss those. One thing that I think previous BioWare games, especially Inquisition, did right was having equal content for all the romance options. Andromeda had this huge disparity in the quality of content and the quantity of content across all the romances. So, for example, you had Korra, who had really in-depth animation in certain scenes, a lot of content, and then you had other characters like Gil or Reyes, that their romances didn't quite have the same when you put them side by side. So I think Inquisition is probably the best example that there was a large variety. And I think that even though they had that variety, each relationship had a good equal amount of content and quality of content. I know a lot of people were upset over, there's this many that you can romance as male writer, this many you can romance as female writer. I'm okay so long as everyone has more than one option. I think it's a lot to ask for them to be equal, like this many gay romance options, this many bisexual ones, this many straight options. I think that's really hard for them to do when they're trying to focus on making good characters first. So long as everyone has more than one, and then all of those romance options have equal quality and quantity content, then I'm good. But I think that's one place they really misstepped hard on Andromeda.
Yeah, Andromeda is interesting in many ways. It felt like a step back in a lot of different departments. I think we can agree on that. But
yeah,
this was especially one of them, and especially something that this community cares about. And why would we care about it? Because they've been so good in the past, right?
Yeah.
They've been so good at hitting that mark, and they completely missed it this time around. And so I really do hope they get it right next time.
Totally.
And so my next point is that I'd like Mass Effect to return to the space opera theme and tone. And when you talk about Mass Effect, a lot of people call it a space opera because of how it feels, the impending doom, the powerful narrative, the fact that, you know, there's so many choices you have to make, you are at the center of it, and whatever choices you make are going to impact what happens in the end. And Andromeda, for me, didn't have that feeling. It was about exploration, having a new beginning, charting a path in a new galaxy. And so those are powerful ideas, and, you know, I guess you could argue they could have been executed better, and maybe I wouldn't be, you know, saying I want them to return to the space opera. But I want elements of that space opera feeling to return. I want that established universe, that central plot, that clear mission. You know, I'm Shepard, damn it, and this is what I'm here to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And kind of going into my next point, I feel that kind of a big component to building that space opera feel that was missing from Andromeda was having more negative consequences. Even if it's not necessarily like direct result of what you do, but just like horrible things happening. Like I feel Andromeda's plot wasn't as gripping as it could have been because a lot of it was more about exploration and like starting things up. It wasn't a lot of like, this horrible thing happened, what do we do, how do we deal with it, or like you're like at this high point and then it all comes crashing down, like a lot of things that the original trilogy did. Like it was really good on having those like gripping, like, oh darn moments.
Yeah.
And Andromeda just didn't have that. I want to be like in a puddle of my own tears on the floor because this game had this really intense moment. Andromeda didn't have too many of those, and I feel that the Ket weren't that big of a threat. We kept beating them all the time, right. So there wasn't that opportunity like in the previous trilogy, especially 2 and 3 specifically. They had plenty of moments that created this kind of urgency against a threat. I don't feel there was that urgency against a greater threat going on in Andromeda.
Right. I think a good way to describe a lot of those big moments in the original trilogy is high stakes. There
was
so high stakes on Vermeer when you had to choose between Caden and Ashley. And it was...
Well, like, I mean, some people it's a choice. For me, it's like my go-to romance option, like every time. So it's not really a choice. Right. But it is a moment. It's a moment of emotion.
Right. Yeah, I chose Caden a lot as well. I don't know about Ashley as a character. We can talk about that later. But,
that's another topic.
Yeah, negative consequences is huge. Just for urgency, for just weight to your actions. That's such a big part of BioWare games. And again, one of those little missteps. So I'd love to see them return to that next time. So for my next point, I want to see a revamped multiplayer mode or co-op. And it was really interesting to me when Mass Effect 3's multiplayer came out, and it really carved a little community out of the existing BioWare community where people could come together and play Mass Effect together. I thought that was really cool. And then when Andromeda's multiplayer came around, it turned out to be largely the same, which isn't always a bad thing, but I played enough of Mass Effect 3's multiplayer to where it made it boring for me. So I'd love to see some kind of expanded experience, and I don't have specifics here, I don't design games, but I want something that is different, perhaps a co-op story that runs alongside the single player, and it doesn't mean that they have to be connected, because I know that was a big thing that frustrated a lot of people about Mass Effect 3, and that readiness rating, and the multiplier, and all of that. And I really love what they did with Dragon Age, actually, and there was like randomized levels and you would go through them and there would be like a treasure at the end. I think they can take that idea a step further, next time around. I just want them to tweak multiplayer in some way.
Yeah, I agree. Having kind of like some kind of story kind of wisp through the multiplayer was really what helped me with Inquisition or even Mass Effect 3. Like, there doesn't have to be something that ties into the single player like Mass Effect 3 did. That was a big issue for a lot of people. But at the same time, I was able to kind of feel like I'm going in and fighting like the Reaper War. Like, this is a big deal. Like, I kind of could like headcanon some things. Like, there was enough of the plot kind of in there. But I agree that Inquisition did a good job with that as well. So I think if there's just more kind of urgency in the multiplayer, if that makes sense, more kind of reason for why you're doing what you're doing in multiplayer, would kind of make it more involved. Because I'm more of like, the story is the only reason I play this game. Sure. So when I go in and play multiplayer, it's just an occasional kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I would like it to have more kind of, you know, something, some kind of flair, some kind of something to spice things up a little bit, you know?
Yeah, and Apex was like an attempt at that, but
yeah,
like the little BioWare blog updates, like I'm sure they spent enough time on that, but it just missed the mark for me. I don't care enough about Apex.
Yeah, same. Another big point of contention that I feel moving forward will probably be settled, but I still want to emphasize it anyway, is that I want at least like 75% of the plot lines to be tied up before DLC or a sequel. Like Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2, they teased the directions of the next game while still completing that game's plot lines within itself. They didn't need DLC to necessarily like tie those off. Mass Effect Andromeda had a lot of unanswered plot lines, like the Benefactor, the Quarian arc, hashtag save the Quarians, the Jardan, etc. I feel like kind of maybe the Jardan and like the Ket Empire was something that could have been left as a teaser, but all the other things with that made it feel like it wasn't a finished product. And I get that the writers were let on rather late, but still, just it never felt complete. Even if it was smaller, maybe it would have felt more complete, but it just never really got there, you know?
Right, it does. Andromeda, for some reason, doesn't feel like a plot line from point A to B to C to D. It feels like broad strokes. And yeah. I think that has a lot to do with the writers getting on late, like you said. And so, absolutely, the original trilogy nailed it with the arcs. There were massive arcs. The Saren arc would be, Mass Effect 1, and then 2 is the Elusive Man and the Suicide Mission.
And the collectors and stuff.
Yeah,
and, yeah.
Like we can we're huge fans, but we can very clearly recall what happened. And in Andromeda, it's just kind of like, it's up in the air. It's mixed. Like, you don't really know exactly what was the arc going on.
Yeah, so, what was the main focus? Was it the Archon? If so, I'm kind of like, you know?
Right. So, I absolutely agree with you. They need to make sure that the plot lines are tied up before they go on to new content. My final point for this video is that I want them to return to a semi-linear narrative and mission structure, and I like how it was. You can say a lot about how the original Mass Effect was, and then they kind of funneled into this action RPG where there was less freedom in how you were doing things, but you could always go off and do side missions at your own pace. There was that cutoff point, like the suicide mission, for example, but I don't know, these open worlds really take away from that feeling of urgency, in my opinion, and the tendency to make every new game open world, massive, endless, when they don't need to be, is way too high right now in this industry, and I think that's just because of the success of those games, the critical success from other developers and other publishers. But when you go linear, it allows the opportunity for more detail in these levels, more polish and more focused results. You get a better product, I feel like, a lot of the time when you go more linear. And so, again, they really nailed it with the original trilogy and kind of balancing those two things, giving players the opportunity to make their own choices and go off and do other stuff, while also funneling people down this one path. And so I would love to see a return to how it was done before.
Exactly. I 100% agree with that. And if you think Mass Effect 3, it had this boom mission, boom mission, boom mission, but you could go off and do this here or that there whenever you kind of felt like it. And my final point pretty much just kind of reiterates yours and builds on it, is that for me, the best narrative structure that BioWare's ever done, at least my favorite, aside from maybe like the last 20 minutes. But for the bulk of the game was Mass Effect 3, and how it was like there's this big story mission, and then you can immediately do the next big story mission, and all of it had this huge weight and urgency, and it was main story content followed by main story content followed by main story content, and you could go off and do like other things if you kind of felt like it, and it all helped your like war asset list thing, and it was just that like boom, action, intensity, more intensity. I was a puddle of tears on the floor all the time. It was wonderful.
Right.
And for me, that kind of like open world content, while some is okay, it really diminishes that kind of balance that you have. So I feel like if they do have planets, maybe don't fill all those planets with side content and side quests. Have like, there are explorable planets, have those planets filled with that core content. Like, I feel like maybe like a beefed up version of like the Krogan ruins kind of plot there could be something, if you kind of get where I'm going.
Yeah, totally.
I feel like something like that could have been good. Just like maybe not so open, maybe, you know, a little more linear, but still have the option to explore instead of it's just all about exploring in all the places.
Right.
Just give me that like boom story content, and then when I need to like take a breather, maybe like go do a little side content here and there, you know, that kind of thing.
And I think a lot of the plot progression for Andromeda was in line with that overall vision of new place to explore. You know, you're charting, you're in uncharted waters, you're discovering things for the first time and all of that stuff. And so I think a lot of, you know, the decision to go to open world and fill it with all these side quests had to do with that right there. And so I think it's an overall game thing that they're going to have to look at if they're going to make it more semi-linear like the original trilogy.
Yeah, totally. Or at least like a happy medium. Yeah.
Right. So.
All right. Well, that's it for us. Thank you so much, JV, for joining me. It was good to have you on.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was awesome.
Yeah, we should do this again sometime. Totally. If you liked this video, be sure to obliterate that like button. Also, tell us what you'd like to see in the Mass Effect franchise, and go over to JV's channel as well. Check out his stuff. He does a lot of really good, in-depth Mass Effect coverage, so be sure to check him out as well.